think that okay, perfect. So thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. I think that we're still getting used to these hybrid situations. But thank you for the attendees today. I have the pleasure to be here in the room with Betty and Katie, and to everybody also that is in attending by Zoom. So today I'm gonna present an ongoing research that we have as part of my PhD program here at UF and studying water governance in Costa Rica. So this is an important piece that I will be presenting to you. So just for you to start, I have this first question to ask you, like, have you felt fatigued or exhausted in the last week? So as you can see here, and I imagine also people in Zoom, we are pretty familiar with this concept of fatigue. So there is Zoom fatigue, as we are not aware after all of these 2 years of pandemic. And there are different types of fatigues that I'm gonna be explaining a bit in the along my presentation. So, and I'm gonna to start, I don't know. Okay. Okay, so yeah. So I wanted to start just presenting to you guys this photo that I took last month, actually, in my way to the Society for Applied Anthropology in Utah to have a presentation. And that took got my attention because, as you can see, and you guys have been driving in your way to Utah, you can see like drowsy drivers use next exit fatigue driving. So, not because I wanted to talk about drowsy drivers, of course, but I'm going to talk about fatigue during my presentation. And I just wanted to use this as an analogy, because if you think about this, what do you think that is bad to drive while you are fatigued? Many things can happen, like an accident, and basically it can feel like the failure of the total system if something happens. So, what will happen if we try to understand fatigue in democratic systems? So what happens if our democratic systems are fatigued? So what can be those implications for the whole system in how these work in order to make decisions, in this case, around environmental issues? So that's why I titled my presentation, "We Are Exhausted, Exploring Fatigue Within Participatory Governance Networks," and I'm going to explain why. So fatigue, as you know, are aware, fatigue is something that has been explored in the medical field, in the social fields, in the sociology and occupational studies. So we all know that all the consequences that fatigue have in all of these fields. But even though all of these unintended consequences, for example, can mean a failure, for example, of the health system, or can mean a failure of our occupational workforce, what happens if this fatigue means a failure for our democratic systems, for participatory modes of governance, the way that we make decisions about the environment? So, and I explored this concept of participation fatigue in the context of participation, of course, and in the context of governance. And what do we understand for governance? We understand for governance as the structures and processes of decision-making about public issues. In this case, I focus on water governance, and where different actors are involved in these processes. And something that is really important here to consider is that all of these decisions are made in these different and diverse participatory spaces that I can explain in a little bit. So, research has suggested that participation is central to solving social, environmental, and research challenges. So, why participation is that important? So research has suggested, like social scientists have suggested, that research is important because, for example, distribute power about the people making decisions. But it's also important because empowers the people, gives them ownership of the process. And also, people can bring to the table novel ideas from their own experience. However, what happens when people get fatigued of participating? What happens when people start to feel to the whole system of participation starts to be wearing down? So how I became interested in this research topic? As many of you, so this is I was really happy when this opportunity opened up to give a Tropilunch, because the last one that we gave was in 2019, right before pre-pandemic, and at that time we were, going to explore water governance issues in Costa Rica. So it was this huge thing of this huge embroidered research interest that we have. But once we start to conduct this preliminary field work, we start to notice some things that start to come over and over and over from the different participants that we have in this preliminary study. And that theme was participation fatigue, that we are fatigued. We are fatigued of the different processes that we have to attain, and I want to explain you a little bit more. But I become interested while working with bureaucrats in Costa Rica. And for I think that here in the TCD we are familiar, but as you know, in anthropology, what we do is basically we go to the communities, we talk with people, we embedded ourselves in the communities, and we try to understand their worldviews. We are trying to understand how they make sense of their words and their actions. So that's what I did, but I did that in a community of bureaucrats. And I did that in a community of bureaucrats while working in an internship with one of the governmental agencies in Costa Rica in charge of doing decisions about water. So even though a lot of the studies about participation have been focusing on the citizens' side of participation, so why it's important to citizens to come and make decisions with the government, what I have noticed is there are not so many, of course there are research, but there are not so many research about trying to understand what happened for governmental officials when somebody from the civil society organization came to make decisions together. Because it's a transition. Usually people in government are used to make decisions around them in their organizations, in their offices. But what happened with somebody from the civil society is brought to the table to make these decisions. So I become interested to see, okay, what happened when governments make these transitions to more participatory modes of governance. So then the bureaucrat settings became my field site. And I start to do I follow this approach of anthropology of studying up, trying to understand not only the people that is affected by the decisions, but also the people that make the decisions. So, and I do that in these spaces of participatory water forums in Costa Rica, as you can see here. And those participatory spaces are really interesting because here people from different sectors, for the tourist sector, agricultural sector, like people from government, but also people from civil society for small aqueducts, they come together to make decisions about water. And what is important in here is that these participatory spaces are state-promoted participatory spaces. So these spaces are the ones that the government actually put in place to bring people together to make decisions. And of course, this was born after in Guanacaste, which is the region where I focus. In 2015, that was a massive drought that basically expanded all of the problems that they already have with water. Water is already a limiting factor, but there was this social unrest and people going to the streets to protest about basically fighting to each other with the big tourist hotels, but the agricultural sector, the civil society, and water for human consumption. So the way that the government responded was, okay, let's create these participatory spaces, because what people was asking for is to have a space in the table that they were making decisions. So that's a place where I situate my study, and I trying to understand how people, and in this case, I focus on bureaucrats, respond to these spaces. So participation fatigue. So what I mean with participation fatigue. So in this case, what the project is about, so I made the connections, I draw the connections between these emerging participatory modes of governance, this interest of people, trying to bring participation to the table. And this is not something new. Since the 70s, all of these participatory democracy moves. And also we can see as scholars that when we are applying to grants, etc., they are always asking, okay, where is the participation side of this? Are you going to participate with other scholars? But also how we are bringing more broader participation. So I draw this connection between these moves to participation, but also what happened when participation came to the table and what happened with the governmental officials, especially. And those experiences of frustration, exhaustion, and overwhelm that people start to feel when they have to participate too much in these kind of spaces. But something that I wanted to make really clear in here is that I'm not making the case against participation. That's not what this research is about. This research is about trying to understand how participation works and trying to make participation better, to actually make participation trying to achieve the goals that I was describing before participation tries to achieve. So, and thank you for this graph. I think that many of you know Carol Jordan. He helped me to do this graph. That is, governmental officials, they have the routine work, the day-to-day interactions that they have to do, but they have their office meetings. And then they have also the water forums meetings. And if you think about it, it's pretty similar to what happened with academics, for example. You have your routine work, you have your organization work, and then you have to go to other type of meetings. So they are pretty similar in that matter. So then how we go about studying participation fatigue? So we go about, we're trying to take this holistic approach to studying participation fatigue, to see the visible and the invisible drivers of participation fatigue. So how the structure, how the governance system is structured, how the policies, the objectives, and the behavior of the people, that the things that we can see, that we can observe, actually influence participation fatigue, but also how the values that they have, how the vision, how the culture that the bureaucratic culture that they share influence, and how these two merge to actually giving us a better understanding of participation fatigue, its consequences, and also how we can solve this issue of participation fatigue. So to do that, we take a network approach, a social network, because why we take this approach? Because we know that as researchers, but also bureaucrats, we don't work by ourselves. We are always embedded in a social organization with different people that we collaborate, that influence the way that we think, that influence so many times our behavior. So the things that we have been finding during this research, and as you can see here in green, in the green squares, you can see are the green squares are the participatory spaces, and the orange circles are some of the people that participate. And this is just a screenshot of one part of this network. Just I put it here so it was clear for me to explain to you guys. But actually, if I pull the whole network, is more, in English, the word is messy, is more messy than you can see here. There are way more participatory spaces and way more people participating. So the things that we have been finding is that, for example, I don't know if you can see my mouse in Zoom, but for example, people that are central to the network, people that is more central, and that participate in so many different spaces are more likely to suffer of participation fatigue. But they are more likely to suffer participation fatigue, especially if they perceive that these participatory spaces are not achieving the goals for the ones that they were created. Also, what we can see is that people that serve as brokers, this guy in here, when I mean as brokers, is the ones that connect different people, but also connect different participatory spaces that are not connected. So there is a dark side of this, because the literature in networks usually say that if you are a broker, you are central, you have more social capital, you are, well known, but also the dark side, putting in that word, is that requires a lot of time. That requires a lot of effort on your part. So you are more likely to become fatigued. And that's something that we are seeing. For example, people that are more central in the network, in the governance network, in water governance network in Costa Rica, and that they are in charge to connect, people from the government, but also from civil society. Those are the people that are usually more fatigued, and especially that happen when their formal role, what I mean with the formal role is that the role, for example, they are the director of the organization, is not the same as the role that they have in the network. So, there is kind of like, I have, not literally like this, but just to simplify, but I have the whole power in my organization because I am the director. But when I am going to these participatory networks, I kind of have to distribute my power. So what happens with these things it can lead also to participation fatigue. So this is some of the things that we are finding, but also we complement this network approach with an ethnographic approach. So ethnography basically seeks to try to understand the cultural settings in which all of these things happen. And ethnography is basically, it includes different research methods that can be participatory observation, but also questionnaires, interviews. So we use and we complement this ethnographic type research with the network to make sense of the network, because the network is kind of like giving us a measure of how different people experience participation fatigue. But ethnography also can give us more like trying to understand their values, their worldviews. And something that we are finding here, for example, and I think that it's important for practitioners, and for example, for people in TCD, is the importance of soft skills. Why I'm saying this? Because what we are noticing is that when there is a misalignment between the professional background of the people that have to attend these participatory spaces in the dynamic of the participatory spaces, there are a more likelihood to have participation fatigue. What I mean with that, like for example, an engineer has been trained to be an engineer. It's not common that an engineer has been trained to be a facilitator. So they kind of like, when there is this misalignment, they are not trained to facilitate, to negotiate, there is frustration among these people. So that's something that we have been noticing more and more, that people that kind of like have these soft skills. So why I say that is important for TCD, because I think that is important what we are learning here, these types of soft skills that we need to put in practice after when we are trying to work in environmental issues and other governance issues too. So kind of like to finish this and to make the case why this is important and how we can also use the concept of participation fatigue to understand what happened in this. As you remember, I was telling you about this increasing importance in people trying to do participatory governance. We all have experienced this increasing importance in people trying to do interdisciplinary work. So that we need to do more interdisciplinary work, that we have to, that this is important also to solve many research problems. So what I am arguing here is that this concept of participation fatigue can help also to understand the different challenges that we have when we are embedded in these interdisciplinary teams of people doing research. So how the way that we design the interdisciplinary system, the way that we design the participatory system, or the participatory governance, can affect and can influence fatigue in different people. So how many participatory spaces we have? There is a central space. There is different like centers of power. How we think about this can actually influence the effectiveness of these spaces. And also how the position that we occupy in these different interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary networks also can affect the way that we make decisions. But not only in academia, but also some of us have had, or some of us will have the chance to actually go outside and be part of these participatory spaces and actually make our research influence policy making, as we were showing before. So how we understand how the structure of this network affects affects people working in these networks, and how affects at different levels these people, but also how their values affect these can influence the way that we make decisions. And that's something that it's important for us to understand. And even though we have focused in here in bureaucrats, what we are trying to see is what happened with the other actors participating in this governance. Something that happened last weekend in Costa Rica, for example, was that they have an absentee in their presidential elections of 42% of the population. So something to think about, and we have been starting to think about, is what happened with the democratic systems as a whole became fatigued. Of course, there are many different things that can affect this, but I think that it's worth it to start to explore this kind of issues. And this is something that actually we have been exploring, and we have been accepted to build this concept of participation fatigue in water governance with UNESCO. So we are going to be publishing in their next in their next issue, probably on November. So we are working on that right now. So I will appreciate as much as feedback that I can get from you guys, how we can move forward with this concept of participation fatigue. And I just want to thank with this slide also to my whole interdisciplinary team that we have been working here as a part of the UF Water Institute, and of course to my senior editor Katie, that she's here, so she helped me to put together this presentation. So thank you so much for attending the Tropilunch here and also by Zoom. And I will pretty much appreciate all the questions and feedback that you can have, because it's also this, we have been pretty lucky to being accepted to present in the National Academy of Science this weekend for the Carby Foundation. We're going to develop this concept of participation fatigue. So any feedback that you can have for the concept, but also for the presentation, it will be pretty much appreciated. So thank you very much.